Hello everyone, thanks for watching another Sunday case study. This week we're going to be looking at Princess Diana. Now, I actually met Princess Diana when I was 4 years old. I'll tell you a little bit about that later on. First of all, let's get into who this lady was by looking at her hands alone. I've uncovered some pretty interesting things about Princess Diana by just looking at her hands, and she is a water hand, there's no doubt about it. The palm is long, the fingers are also long, they splay outwards, and the palm is wider at the top of the palm than at the base, and we call this a broad-topped palm. And what this means is that Diana, her emotional capacity is strong, and also her mental capacity. The thoughts, the feelings are constant, they're active. Now in this video I'm going to compare the oldest pictures of her palms and the last pictures of her palms to see what we can see in terms of change. But on that note, water hands are all about change. They're about adapting, being flexible, fluid. They have changeable temperaments, and they are emotional, sensitive, intelligent, creative, dreamers, artistics. I'm aware that's not a word. Now, when we talk of elements in palmistry, it's just one way of categorizing the palms. It's not foolproof. There's no one there's no one method that works for everyone. But there are pros and cons to the Fred guessing system of form. Every element has its advantages and disadvantages, and when you're more strongly definite to the element, then the strengths of that element are stronger, but so too are the disadvantages, the weaknesses. And water hands tend to be more, they have a stronger self-destructive, self-sabotage tendencies. They're more inclined to have eating disorders, depression, addiction, coping mechanisms like OCD and eating disorders. Eating disorders can be seen in the palms by a large space between Jupiter and Saturn, as well as a large space between Mercury and Apollo. And when this happens, you often see the two middle fingers sort of tightly wound together. They're very close together, and we see that in particular in all the images of Diana's hands on the left and the right hands, but in particular with the older images, the middle fingers are very tightly wound together, and this particularly on the right hand, and this shows us someone who feels like they're stuck in a rut. Now when you're a strong, emotional, sensitive, deep feeling water hand, highly empathic, then the confinements, this sort of oppression, this feeling of being stuck in a rut, not being able to get out of your situation, you're going to then likely you're going to find a coping mechanism. And we know that Diana had bulimia, so there is a correlation, a direct correlation between the tightly wound middle fingers and the large spaces seen between the first and the fourth fingers. And also a large space found here, where we see you can't quite see it here, but when we see the sort of the skin pulled away, and it creates this sort of gouge in between Saturn and Jupiter, as well as a low-lying Mercury. These are common signs of someone who has had a lacking of a father bonding during latency. And this can have a detrimental effect on our kind of psychological and emotional makeup, our ability to express ourselves and articulate our emotions within close personal relationships. However, Diana's Mercury finger hasn't been stunted by this. It's still long, it's low set, but when we offset the length of it against the first two, the second and the third phalanges of Apollo, actually we have a long Mercury finger. And in all the images we see quite a large space. We see Mercury sort of pulling away. Jupiter as well is quite sort of distant, in terms of the finger leaning itself, and it does sort of pull in at the tip. And what this sort of means for us is that she is trying to get out of her situation. She desires and craves to get away, escape, travel. She wishes to wander and express herself in isolation. Now, another really common theme of the water hands is to have quite a large space between the life and the headline. And this is always seen with people who are impatient, brash, impulsive. Their decisions, their mind energies aren't connected with their life's energies. There's a disconnect there. And it's always seen with people who are quite radical, who are risk takers. That's the main one here. They often, seen in adrenaline junkies. The fingertips themselves are either rounded to conic on Mercury, and this shows someone who's living in the moment, who has a need to feel. So this really, the picture I'm getting here is of a person who is, if they're not getting what they need emotionally out of a relationship, they're going to have to move on. They're not going to be restricted. They have such strong feelings and a need to feel and have those feelings reciprocated. This is someone who has a lot of love to give and a lot of desire for that love to be reciprocated. And also someone who needs to feel a great sense of benefit and satisfaction from the work they're doing. They need to feel that on an emotional level, and if they're not, then they'll move on. And there's really a lack of, it doesn't really matter what the cost here. This is not actually a preference. This person they have needs. Now, as I have said, water hands are very sensitive, very empathic, and when a person is highly sensitive, they often have an ability to pick up on how others are feeling. And Diana's Mercury line, it's just sensational. Now, this kind of water hand, for such a strong Mercury line to appear on this kind of water hand, it really paints a picture of someone who is able to sense how others are feeling on every level, on not just a gut level, but they feel the negative and the positive around them. And this is partly why they have such a strong need to change the lives of others around them, because they can't bear living in this world of negativity. So it's either change it or die trying. And actually, this kind of Mercury line on a water hands tend to be, actually, in other books, in other categorizing methods of categorizing palms, water hands are often said to be of the psychic variety. And this kind of water hand with this kind of Mercury line, you would be silly not to consider the great possibility here of sensitivity to the point of actually having psychic abilities. And if we look very closely, you can actually see a ring of Solomon here, and this shows great wisdom and a need to understand and explore the esoteric arts. And it was said that Diana had explored these kind of areas of and walks of life. And this is also seen by, notice the headline. There's a large space between the head and the heartline as well, particularly later on. And this shows, not only do we see, the warmth and the openness of this person. This person has their arms wide open. They're highly generous, giving. They want what's best for everyone at the expense of their own life. But also it shows an open-mindedness as well. And this is also seen by the low hanging thumb. And if we saw the headline also forks as well. And if we saw a thumb that the angle was really sort of almost right angle, we'd be looking at someone who's actually a bit unrealistic, perhaps even, because they're so open. You kind of get to the point where there's a pro and a con to everything, right? But this is balanced out by this ever so slightly kind of skeptical point of view as well. So she's open-minded, she's balanced, is what I'm trying to say. There's a balance here. This draws her back down to earth. The headline here that tucks inwards, this is who she is, how she thinks behind closed doors. And the headline that kind of doubles here, someone asked me a question very recently, when a headline forks, is it the doubling of a headline or is it just a fork? It's a great question. It's a matter of interpretation, but I would say both, really. The forking of a headline is known as a writer's fork. It's shown as someone who's able to see things from more than one perspective. And this sort of inner fork, it kind of nosedives into Luna, into a place of depression, and unrealistic thoughts and fantasy, and these dark, typical kind of tendencies for a water hand to get a bit inside themselves and to get a bit self-absorbed and really down in the dumps. But this is someone who cannot stop feeling the negativity around them. So it's understandable for this to occur for water hands. But then also there's this outside kind of rational way of thinking as well. The headline is very long, and this is always seen in the palms of people who affect the lives of many. And actually this sort of upper headline, the one that the rest of the world sees, is actually overall balances out. It's pretty straight, pretty lateral thinking, pretty practical, and there is some overall squareness to the hand itself, and this provides that extra sort of practicality, and again this pulls a person back down to earth. You can't really see it on this image, it's not quite clear enough. I mean, I can just about see it, but it's not really good enough for everyone at home. But on this palm here we can see the lifeline actually overlaps at this age here, and this is about the age of 35, and you can just about see a Mars line develop at that same age. Now Mars, the god of war, this is the need to fight and the need for assistance in conflict, and it's at this age that of course Diana divorces Prince Charles, now King Charles. The lifeline overlapping, now let's not be mistaken here, a lifeline overlapping is very different to a lifeline breaking. If a lifeline breaks, there's a danger there to the life, to the environment, to the way of living. It's sudden, it's abrupt, and there's chaos, it's dangerous. However, this lifeline overlaps. There's a clear difference here, and I don't want to try to I'm just trying to be very realistic with what the hand says here, and I just don't want anyone getting the wrong idea about what this might mean in terms of disaster and death, because it's not the same thing. An overlap is a change of environment, and we see the lifeline itself pulling away into outside Venus, outside of the familiar, the home, the family, relationships and love. We see a bold step outside of the environment. The lifeline is not just how the constitution and the vitality and immune system and health, it's their environment as well, it's the way they live their life. And so this lifeline overlapping has shown here a bold step to move into the unknown, into the outside world, into a fearful place of a new environment, a new social environment. Mars, this place here, is generally how we are seen and perceived in the outside world by others. It's this sort of social environment here, and it's quite scary when we step outside into the unknown, into a place where lots of people we just don't know. We just don't know how that's going to pan out. Now there are distinctive differences in Diana's left and right hands. The left hand shows a fate line that starts way down on Pluto. Luna, it affects us from afar with unforeseeable changes outside of our control. Pluto affects us from even further. It's even more unknown, it's even more mysterious, and it's even more powerful in terms of how we are affected by those events. And looking at this fate line, it's immensely strong. It appears to sort of cut the hand in two almost, and it's always, this is always seen in the palms of people who have a destiny that sort of, it cannot be changed. Interestingly, the right hand shows actually the kind of a lacking of a fate line altogether, whereas on the left we see a very strong fate line. So, this is the lifeline. As I say, it's an overlapping lifeline. So it's easy to get it confused, but look on the left hand, as I say, we've got here this incredibly strong fate line, and on the right we just don't see that. And this is probably one of the later images, one of the final pictures of Diana with clearly showing her hand like this. And we can here on this right hand just about make out some sort of fate line. So I don't know if this developed a little bit later on. It's not as strong in any case. The right hand shows the physical, the practical material. So if we have a left hand with a strong fate line and a right hand with a weaker one, then it shows that inherently they have desires, they have purpose, they have a feeling that they know what it is they want to do. And it's a very strong feeling, and it's inherent. It's going to happen. Whereas at the right hand, it's showing that's not going to happen. This is the practical. It's quite confusing for me to interpret, but it's profound. On the right hand, it does sort of appear as though there is one that touches, it reaches the headline, but then stops from that age onwards. The headline is quite high up in the palm, and the headline, for me this is really interesting because it changes course. When we look at the headline here, it sort of straightens out. It's a little bit of a wave in there, but it straightens out. On the right hand here, this is, as I say, a couple of years later. She's 36 now. Where this headline, fate line meets the headline, which wasn't here before, it's all quite confusing. The headline now decides to rise upwards a little bit. Now this shows she's thinking about things. She's not getting so into her own head. She's thinking more clearly now. She's thinking about the future and securing that with material gain. So she's clearly got some ideas as to what she wants to do. She's not finished yet. Also, on the right hand, there seems to be a fate line here that kind of connects and crashes into. It's really confusing. It crashes into an overlapping lifeline, and it looks like a fate line, but actually it's an overlapping lifeline. But the lifeline where the fate line disappears, or rather where the lifeline disappears, the fate line takes over, and vice versa. So it can get really sort of tricky because in some sense or another they are one and the same, but it depends on the context. There are some major changes, and I know this is Diana's hand. I know it is. But there are some just drastic differences within just a few years that develop. And you can see it here, look, even from this far away. Look at Luna, there's a cut here that comes in right up on Luna. We don't see that on this image here. I'm going to get a little bit closer and show you. Just have a look. You can see this little gouge that's taken out here. Just there. See that? It's like Luna sort of cut inwards a little bit there. And this line, it's significant to me because it points towards the age of 36. It's connected to the line. There's another line here. You can actually see, I can't get any closer, but you can see that it's directly connected to the life. And there actually appears to be a bit of an island here. So this is essentially an escape line. This is an unforeseen event outside of control. These are outside forces at work. There's a direct correlation here. Another point I wanted to make out here, just sort of rounding off the end of this video, is that the Saturn finger, the tip of Saturn, is on the short side. A short Saturn first phalanx is someone who is indicative of someone who is accepting of their own fate, come what may. The other thing I find particularly interesting is, and you may well have already noticed, the kind of the whiteness of the tip here. And as I say, this is one of the last images of this nature where she's sort of showing her hand. This is, one of the final kind of images, really. And the tip of Saturn in particular is an indicator of, it's hard to explain it, it's like a karmic gauge. And this is quite often why, when I'm doing palm readings, I look at this finger and I try to scry, and I learn what I can on an unconscious level. And it's almost like Frodo's sword in Lord of the Rings glowing when there's a goblin nearby. That's kind of what's happening here. Apparently a mould of Diana's hand has been made fairly recently. It's not all that accurate in terms of studying the chirology, but I have seen a star on the end of her fate line here. I'm not taking too much from this, but a star on the end of a fate line essentially is quite literally someone who is star-crossed. Their fate is sealed and doomed, so to speak. The fate line can be read alongside the success line, and interestingly in Diana's hand, where this possible fate line here ends, the success line continues. So she lives on in the hearts and minds of many, not forgotten. Her work was tremendous, and she stood for, I think, what a lot of people felt was missing among aristocracy, using great wealth and influence for good. Now, Terry Stokes has written his book, and I keep plugging this actually. I don't get paid anything for it, I'm not sponsored, but it's an incredible book. It's 50 case studies in modern palmistry, and in it he does a palm reading for Princess Diana. Terry actually met Princess Diana when he was doing some charity work for opening up a hospital, and she came along and she was interested, and he read her palms. As I say, she was very interested in esoteric arts and anything sort of psychic, very open-minded. And Terry read her palms, and it was revealed that she knew she would die young. She felt like that she was pushing her luck, but as I say, that gap between the life and the headline shows a risk taker. And as I say, there were needs here for fulfillment, to change the world and to improve the lives of many, to use that wealth and influence that she had. Otherwise, what's the point? And that's the kind of sense I got. So I think she actually knew that she was going to die young, and she knew why. And Terry also saw it in her palms, and his reading is quite different in his book. I highly recommend it. It's pretty much always in the description of all of my videos, because he's a good friend and an excellent mentor. So I actually met Princess Diana when I was 4 years old, and I was in a nursery, sort of preschool. My mum, my family, we had no money. And so she knew that Princess Diana was coming around to speak to all of the children. I can't remember exactly why, I don't know what the purpose was. But she dressed me in the best possible clothes that I had, and I was dressed in a Ghostbusters sweater. So I was watching this princess walking around the room, talking to all these children. All the parents were lined up against the walls, beaming, mine included. And she came over to me, and I was very nervous, and she said, "Oh, Ghostbusters. William likes Ghostbusters. Who's your favourite Ghostbuster?" And I wanted to impress her, so I said, "You are." And she recoiled with laughter, and I felt like an idiot. But the first lady I tried to impress and really hit on, I suppose, was a princess. So, aim high. So there we have it. Let me know what your thoughts are on this video, and let me know if you enjoyed it. I've tried to forget what I've already read about Diana's palms with Terry's reading, because I haven't read it for quite some time, and just sort of just really read what I can see and go from what I've read here. Start from scratch, essentially. And I think I've done okay, but I'm not completely convinced. I don't like all these celebrity readings all that much, because the clarity is so poor. So then my clarity is not so great either. However, I've done okay with this one, I think. So let me know what your thoughts are, and who shall I do for next week? Okay, one of my subscribers mentioned it recently. They've mentioned it before as well, so I think it's about time. I'm going to try to do Michael J. Fox, and we'll look at his decline in his health and what the hands show before and after, if I can find the images. So stay tuned for next Sunday, and I'll see you there. Please subscribe.